This video is about the dark night of the soul on the spiritual path. What is it? Does it even exist? The correlation between suffering and realization, between darkness and bliss, between depression and dark night, my own personal experiences with it, and how I used to be bedridden for weeks at a time, and why not everyone goes through such intense experiences. The limits of modern Dharma and the non-dual extremist. The difference between Tantra and Sutra, between Arhat, Bodhisattva, and the path to Buddhahood, and why you can be blindsided by your own realization. Pre versus post-awakening dark nights, why Anatta is only the beginning, and why it's so difficult to find a path afterwards. Dark night of the soul in art, music, and philosophy. Deconstructing the Matrix by understanding views and the 5 aggregates to unstuck your life, boost your practice, and unlock siddhis and powers. The difference between experiences and realization. How to use dark nights as catalysts to gain insights into the nature of mind and reality for awakening. At the end, I'll offer some remedies and techniques for getting through to the dark night of the soul. This is new territory.
I delete my brain.
Dark night of the soul, dark night of the soul. What is that? Some people think once you start talking about dark night, you start framing things. And you start giving things narrative. There's a danger, I think, in verifying dark night. But basically a dark night is just a contraction in your energy field. Now, if you don't give it narrative or drama, it's technically not quote-unquote dark night. That's a man-made term. When thoughts are coupled with sensations, they both intensify exponentially, right? In a feedback loop, so to speak. Some people can call it ego backlash. Usually when you have an opening to awareness or whatever, more of your stuff comes out. More of your trauma surfaces. You go deeper into your subconscious and bring it to the consciousness, the shadow to the light. The bigger your opening is, the more subtle, the deeper stuff that gets uncovered. The stuff that you never get to see before you open up the awareness. So that's the cycle of Dana Ingram's work, arising and passing away, the bliss, the ecstasy, the spiritual experiences, the mystical experiences, and then following that usually is a dark night of the soul, because the stuff comes out. And then when you merge, when you integrate the stuff, when you align the shadowy aspect of your psyche to non-dual awareness, then you integrate it. That's the integration, or you can say you dissolve it. When that happens, you get to a stage of equanimity, where you kind of like you see how the dark night and the mystical experiences are just two sides of the same coin, or they merge together. And then you go through the next cycle of opening, dissolution, equanimity. That's pretty much the cycle. But that's the cycle of life. So that's one useful perspective to have, to view dark night episodes as causes and conditionings that happens due to the loss of nature. So these cycles are no different than the weather. But you're the sky, completely impersonal. Not trying to glorify suffering or anything, but in a way, the more suffering you can live, the more resilient the mind becomes. Even like in working out, you work out really hard, you get sore for the next few days. That's your dark night. And then you recover. And then you have a new equanimity point where you're stronger than before, you're more equanimous than before, your mind is more powerful and more peaceful than before, right? That's pretty much the cycle of the entire path and nature cycle. It's just happening by itself. Also, the dark night is just your quote-unquote consciousness getting upgraded, in a sense. You can frame it in a more positive way. So this is your first workout in how long?
2 years.
So you used to be a fitness freak, right? Like
Yeah,
years.
I was a fitness mentor and everything.
But then you just stopped. Why?
I don't know, I wanted to focus on building my wealth and deconstructing my mind. It's so hard to keep the dynamic with me because I'm going to bring out every man's conditioning. And then they project it onto me, so either I become the enemy or I become like the opportunity to transcend that, embody that, let go of that. So they reject it, but you accept it right away into the nothing, and then it integrates itself.
I just throw all my shadows at you. You're like, hey, look, it's not the shadow anymore.
Yeah.
And then you transcend the duality between darkness and light. So even the dark night experiences, the dark night of the soul, is dependent on the bliss and the mystical state.
Because it had to go back down.
Yeah.
It was like...
They give rise to each other. They manifest,
Yeah.
they create, they co-create each other. In order to attain something with greater value, something lesser has to die. Like the transformation from a caterpillar to a butterfly. You continuously dissolve into the inevitable until something new emerges. Now everybody wants to merge with infinity, but when they do, they freak out. But how strong is your aspiration? Actually, you can't merge with the universe because you're already that. You can say the entire path is breaking through fear barrier after fear barrier. From the known to the unknown until the known becomes the unknown and the unknown becomes the known. Going for a PR and a squat, you don't know if you're gonna make it. To shred fat and gain muscles, there's gonna be a lot of blood, tears, and sweat. It's a process of alchemy. Adyashante's enlightenment is a destructive process. It's not about becoming a happier or better person. Actually, that's not quite true, but it has a point. But be careful not to fall into the extreme view of nihilism or non-being. But awakening is the crumbling away of untruth. It's seen through the facade of pretense. It's the complete eradication of everything you imagine to be true. Sure, there's a lot of bliss on the path, but there's also the grieving, the loss, and the sorrow. The falling apart, the fear, the chaos, and disruptions you experience prior to each rebirth must be accepted unconditionally. Because true equanimity is not so much about fabricating a state of stillness during meditation. It's more about disappearing into life regardless of the highs and the lows. Spirituality is a process of creative destruction of death and rebirth over and over again as you go beyond the beyond the beyond. You can observe cycles and cycles of this progress of insight during a single meditation sit or in the arising and vanishing of a single sensation, the big bang of the awakening and the big crunch that follows, the inhale and the exhale of the breath, the eccentric and the concentric movement of a lift, bulking, cutting, and repeat, day and night and the seasons, falling in love and breaking up, the humpy motion when you have sex, birth and death of stars and galaxies. Every work of art is created through the same dialectics. Fractals within fractals of the yin and yang, embedded within each other, co-arising through, with, and as each other. From the subatomic to the cosmic, governed by the same vibrational patterns of expansion and contraction in various degree and density is what makes up the geometry of the universe. As you go beyond the linear space-time causality, you'll see that expansion and contraction occur simultaneously, which means that they cancel each other out. Then you reach the realm of the deathless, where all sensations are non-arising, non-abiding, and non-ceasing. It takes a tremendous amount of power to unravel the mind layer by layer.
Opening my third eye.
You have to continue to increase your capacity by putting in the reps. That's why those non-dual view of, oh, there's nothing to do and you don't need to practice can be a trap. Now, it's a good mantra to have when you're striving too hard. If that's the only view that you hold, your progress will stall. Sometimes you gotta relax and surrender, other times it's ruthless grinding. Other times it's finding the perfect balance between effort and effortlessness. Ultimately, it doesn't make a difference because you can definitely practice diligently without a seeker, without expectations, while thinking that everything is already perfect the way it is. Because you can will without agency and think without thoughts. Ultimately, there's nothing to dissolve and there's no path, but at the same time, there is a process of purification and there is a path. Can you hold both views simultaneously? Think of the amount of effort it takes to become a classical pianist or Olympic gymnast. Spiritual athletics is no different. You're like, oh, what about people like Eckhart Tolle? Oh, that's 1 in a million. And even so, he suffered tremendously prior to awakening, and that was his work. But even after Anatta realization, or MTCB fourth path, what most people in the modern Dharma community consider to be the holy grail or the end of the path is only the beginning. Sure, it's the end of the development on a very specific axiom. But if you switch vehicle from the Theravada to the Mahayana to the Vajrayana path, that's the first, second, and third turning of the wheel of Dharma, represented by Siddhartha Gautama, the Michael Jordan of consciousness, Nagarjuna, the Kobe Bryant of consciousness, and Papasambhava, the Steph Curry of consciousness, respectively. Then Anatta realization is the bare minimum requirement to navigate through some of these tantric practices and philosophical trainings from these later vehicles or paths. Or else you might get injured or go insane. Or these practices simply won't work for you. It's difficult to attain a 40-inch vertical without squatting twice your body weight. Some people experience dark nights because they aren't ready to traverse through some of the territories in their practices, including psychedelics. So it's wise to first realize emptiness, then engage in form or energy. Sure, you can practice Tantra before Anatta or do them simultaneously even, but always keep the bullseye on the realization to minimize the risk of rarefying special states, experiences, and powers, and the self that experiences them. To rarefy means to make something solid and substantial. People are afraid of the void or emptiness because they think it's something real, when in fact the insight is to see through to the lack of intrinsic existence in all phenomena, including emptiness itself. If you think emptiness means things don't exist, you're clinging onto non-existence, which means you're clinging onto existence. By saying something doesn't have a meaning, you are giving it a meaning, right? So what's the middle way? Can you perceive things as being there but not there? You can say emptiness is what gets revealed when you negate everything, including the process of negation itself. So in a sense, there is no such thing as emptiness per se, but in the most mindfuckery and paradoxical way possible, it is what you are. Infinite potentiality that's self-aware, beyond even existence or non-existence. Now, there are almost no resources out there in the spiritual marketplace beyond the limits of modern Dharma, for reasons that I won't get into here, but unless you're a genius or have extremely good starting condition, you might need a sangha with coaches and training partners, or even be connected to a lineage to climb those mountains without falling. Your mind stream has to be connected to tens, hundreds, thousands, or even infinite numbers of sources of other mind streams to receive direct transmission to co-create and complete the mandala. You might access unbounded consciousness, abide in non-duality, or even break through to Anatta by yourself, but we're talking about something far, far beyond. We're talking about completion to full Buddhahood. From the Bodhisattva perspective, Anatta realization, the permanent dissolution of seer, hearer, thinker, doer, feeler, and observer, is only the first out of 10 plus bhumis, with Arhatship being the 7th of the 8th bhumi. Now the Theravada game is a solo realizer game. The Bodhisattva game is flipping your realization inside out to encompass all cosmos for the sake of all sentient beings. From these later vehicles, an Arhat is incomplete. An Arhat is like becoming a violin virtuoso, but you still play music written by other composers. The path of Bodhisattva is more like becoming a conductor while playing your own composition until you become the entire orchestra and beyond. An Arhat is becoming the biggest and the most aesthetic bodybuilder, but for the Bodhisattvas and Buddhas, performance is key. As contemplative athletes, you must have enough strength, power, and speed to not just pull people out of burning buildings, but taking on creative projects and mastering your own crafts as vehicles to transmit the Dharma. If you look at some of the Vajrayana art, it's extremely trippy, right? They serve as functions to break you out of your current paradigm, including the one of spirituality. I'm going to talk more about this later, but the Theravada path calls for renunciation. But for the Vajrayana and Dzogchen vehicle, emotion is path. Creativity and expression is path. Actually, there is nothing that isn't the path. So an Arhat walks away from the world, while a Bodhisattva walks into the world. Emotions like anger, sadness, desire, and jealousy aren't viewed as negative, and it's naive to eliminate these emotions because they're powerful forces that serve their particular functions. The tantric move is to transmute this energy alchemically into different types of wisdom and creative expression, and ultimately see that they are the very manifestation of the mirror-like wisdom of true nature. Now, one vehicle is not more superior than the other ones, right? They're not completely exclusive either, it's just different games. Even looking aesthetic still serves its function. An Arhat can be sitting inside a cave and still be radiating energy that benefits the world. And even Vajrayana is just one lineage out of infinite numbers of games you can play in multiverses within multiverses. Now, whether or not you believe quote-unquote completion is possible is besides the point, because that question only comes from sentient beings. Now, the moment your mind closes off to the possibility of the impossible, you create a view that reinforces it. You don't even have to frame this around spirituality. It's really about reaching your full potential as humans and beyond. It's about developing capacities and abilities that's far beyond your imagination, yogically, intellectually, creatively, physically, or even professionally. So we're talking about building a Renaissance man here, or a maestro. Chances are, if you're watching this, you've been doing this since beginningless time.
I saw your video and I was like, fuck, this dude experiences the world like I do. You're always making something out of nothing. It's like the meaning and the filter that you attach to that mirage, but it's all empty and it's all interpenetrating. So it's actually, there's no boundary. Like, there's just the more quote-unquote seeming others that agree to that, that creates a matrix of itself, and that creates physical form, even the construct of time. It's just a hologram, it's just a texture. When somebody with quote-unquote a high state of consciousness sees you as empty, that's beneficial because they're giving you an opportunity for you to see yourself that way.
Realifying anything, to make anything at all into a thing, can trigger dark nights, because you're creating a separation between you and God, turning away from the truth and the laws of nature, by trying to cling onto something when you can't even step into the same river once. The subject in here is grasping onto and is identified with the objects out there, solidifying both, and this can include the self and others, objects, the universe, God, space and time, causality, meaning, meaninglessness, consciousness, and all your mental and emotional states, beliefs, and spiritual experiences, and even enlightenment. And when you're trying to resist that resistance, everything intensifies because now you're verifying verification. Now, when you realize reality, or what you thought to be you and all of your meaning-making system isn't what it seems after having glimpses into true nature, everything you're constructing to hold the old paradigm together start to crumble like a house of cards, and you become disoriented and confused. When the realization is still partial, the mind is going to cling on to the old paradigm or revert to the new and resist the dissolution, and you're going to feel pretty fucked. Sure, you can do shadow work or self-improvement on a personal conventional level, but unless you go beyond content, you just put in lipstick on a pig. More precisely, the insight is to see the essential nature of content, like recognizing that the virtual reality world, regardless of games, is made up of illuminated pixels, and what's seemingly quote-unquote beyond it is also made up of the same substanceless substance, because there's no distinction between content and context, and the emptiness is no other than form. So the ultimate way to unfuck yourself is the deeper and deeper penetration into the nature of reality by seeing that all phenomena are impermanent, insubstantial, and without an inherently existent self. Now the key word is inherently. The conventional self still serves its function, right? When you take on the annihilation view and try to eradicate the self, that's just more clinging and grasping. So the first step in getting through to the dark night of the soul is to stop resisting the flow of life and accept the fragility of life and death, and that things arise only to pass away, and that's the beauty of it. And then you continue to embody this insight so deeply that you become it. When the swimmer realizes that he's always been the river, there's no more reference point between this or that, up or downstream, flow or no flow. And then even the river disappears. Infinite consciousness that's constantly like refreshing itself, and then collapsing into itself simultaneously.
Yeah,
it's like arising and then collapses
it feels
simultaneously.
Like this,
yeah.
And then there's no
This arising is the passing. Yeah.
And then like it's always happening. And then if like the focuses on this, then it tries to mix it, and then this still happening.
You can't focus on anything.
So it's like somebody, whatever. If they stay stuck in an image, then this is still happening. But then like the focus stuck in the image creates that solidity, and that's the contraction. And it's like that's me.
Right.
And then nothing's really happening, but then it seems surreal.
It seems surreal because like the focus is there. That's why letting go of the direction of attention is so important. I thought I was a sock puppet, but there's never been a foot inside a sock that perceives a do. And when you realize this, even the sock becomes invisible because the apprehender, the apprehended, and the process of apprehension codependent arise. I thought there was a ground under my feet, but there's always been groundlessness without center, edge, time, or location. When you just allow everything to be as it is, something much more profound, powerful, beautiful, exquisite, and mysterious starts to open up. It's an abyss that's full of everything, and is continuously and dynamically expressing, with purity and clarity, and it's never fixated and never landing. Now the good news is, if you're free falling 24/7, there's no place to fall. But if you resist,
hey, this is Infinite Bra checking in for our podcast, bra. You have no self. And no games. Frank, show yourself.
sometimes people have this like hero's journey mindset. It's like, fuck yeah, dark night of the soul. Yeah, it becomes another ego trip.
Yeah, I think it's like the reverse of like the mystical bliss. People really like to have that sort of like drama.
I think the first time I heard about Dark Night of the Soul was when I took a screenwriting class. Every single movie has that arc. It's about self-discovery, right? And then there's always like around like the end of the second act, where the protagonist going through the arc of the hero's journey will always have a dark night scene where he's about to like lose everything in the anti-climax scene before he rises again to the climax. If it's good filmmaking, every shot, every scene, every act has a dark night moment. In music, harmony only makes sense because of dissonance, and the silence gives rise to the notes and vice versa. Painting is only possible because of the interplay between shadow and light, background and foreground.
Vote for me.
The dialectics is the philosopher Hegel's idea.
What are y'all doing?
That all changes in evolution arises through conflicts
What are y'all supposed to be doing?
from opposing forces. First you have a thesis, then comes an antithesis. The merging of the two gives birth to a new synthesis, which then becomes a new thesis, and on and on and on.
This is just inside of our minds, bro. I don't feel like I'm really existing. That's why I'm actually alive, because I feel like I'm already dead. It's like a vampire. I lived for so many centuries that just like now being in the game is just like being a glitch.
Eckhart Tolle calls Dark Night of the Soul no man's land. Feels like you're in limbo. You got like one foot in the voidness or infinity, the other one is still in solidity, so you feel like you're in a purgatory. When you have a glimpse or an opening into divinity or true nature as being spacious, empty, boundless, open and free, the rest of the ego structure is either going to grasp onto it to make it last, or develop an aversion to whatever isn't aligned with that truth, which is the same process because clinging is aversion. So if you're disoriented, and this creates a feeling of depersonalization or derealization. This is the bad trip part of the psychedelic trip, right? Some people call this ego backlash. The ego structure, just like any other survival mechanism, is going to do everything in its power to fight back and resist its own demise. Now, if the nervous system responds to the opening with fear, disgust, anxiety, you have the dark night. If the nervous system responds to truth with bliss, ecstasy, or rupture, you have your mystical experiences. But they're two sides of the same coin. Like I said again, that's why I always say bliss is actually kind of a contraction.
And you can observe pain, intense pleasure.
Say that you're in a very deep jhanic absorption or samadhi, or after a spiritual opening, you might think you're getting closer to realization, but it can actually be quite the opposite. Lucifer is just a symbol. We cannot let go of light. So when you're holding on to bliss or mystical states, you're actually being enchanted by the Luciferian energy, right? You can be blinded by light the same way that you're blinded by darkness. Sometimes the energetic release after an opening, and the light is so bright that it's destabilizing. You can't even see the inside. Avoiding darkness or shadow instead of facing it directly is no different than clinging onto bliss. Being a complete human being means accepting that the most evil and the fucked up parts of humanity is also inside you. There's no separation.
death is an integral part of life and vice versa.
Rarefying equanimity and stillness is also the same trap. It's yet another partial view, right? To hold on to the feeling of peace and contentment, right? This is where the progress stalls. Find a way to keep the fire burning. But regardless of the highs and lows, always investigate at the experiential or visceral level the true nature of all experiences, with stuff like Vipassana or self-inquiry. Buddha nature, or what you truly are, prevails across all states because that's all there is. And that's the difference between realization and experience. Now, there's only one insight with many flavors, that all things are devoid of intrinsic existence, but empty things depend or arisen from other empty things to create a multiplicity of interwoven appearances. Infinite potentiality is possible because nothing has a true essence. The born is the unborn, the unmanifested is the manifested. So emptiness, dependent origination, love, and infinity are a different facet of the same insight. Don't get trapped in experience, penetrate the insight. Mystical experiences that lie in the bliss is actually no different than the dark night. But then you want to use these opportunities to see through the intrinsic nature of all states and all phenomena. Like, just investigate. Like, what is it made out of? It's almost like walking around a sculpture and feeling it. Investigate the nature of sensations. What is the nature of the mind? What is the nature of the ultimate reality?
What is this?
Yeah, what is this?
It doesn't matter if it's a contraction or the expansion.
It doesn't matter if it's
You are
contraction or
beyond
expansion.
both.
Yeah.
The density felt so dense in comparison to like the expansion. The body was floating. There was like MDMA experience. The body's completely expanded. All the expansion that I felt, then I had to merge with all the darkness or shadow that I hadn't seen yet, or something like that. So then, as high as it got, as bad as it got, it had like the Jing Jang experience. So it was never about the quote unquote failed test. It was about integrating the shadow into the expansion that I had.
Into the light, yeah. You're inside all the Buddhas, and all the Buddhas are inside you. Now, the difference between depression and dark night of the soul is that the depression is more personal, and dark nights are more existential because it has to do with the wrong views about the nature of reality. But of course, they aren't completely exclusive. Both have to do with partial views. It's extremely important to see how your mind is always holding on to partial views and how they're constructed, because views completely dictates who we think we are and how we construct reality. Now, you may think only people like suicide bomber hold extreme views, but unless you have very deep awakening, you're always holding on to extreme views. If you haven't seen through self, you're holding on to one of the most extreme views in nature, the self-view. And each view is composed of sub-views within sub-views within sub-views. Other words to describe a view is a paradigm or a stance, which leads to specific embodiments and ways of becoming. All of your views make up a particular geometry of your being and presence, aggregated or put together by perceptual, conceptual, emotional, sensorial, epistemological, ontological, or even energetic patterns that shapes your reality. All views, except for the ultimate liberating view of no views, are obscurations and false illusions, filters that are concocted due to certain karmic tendency or conditionings. Going beyond all views means you can embody all views simultaneously, because reality without filters is omniscient. What you are isn't a person walking around in the world, that's just one geometry and it's legit. You can't really visualize it. But what you truly are is closer to a boundless hyper-donut sphere, without inside or outside, beyond but includes the four-dimensionality of the space-time fabric. An infinitely unique fractal that both contains and is contained by and is indistinguishable from the whole that's constantly shape-shifting, morphing, vibrating, and fluxing, yet at the same time is completely beyond stillness and movement, identity and identitylessness. If you can flexibly deconstruct and reconstruct the mandala of your being and presence, you can mold and shape-shift reality and its trajectory. Now, the fact that you think this is quote-unquote base reality is nothing but conditionings at the collective level, agreed upon and consented by billions and billions. But it's just one particular view within views that we're constantly construing to make sense of the world and to navigate through it. And most of these views operate at the subconscious level, something that's taken for granted as walking into a salon, or getting your hair done, or walking into a kitchen to microwave your dinner depends on layers and layers of meaning-making systems that go completely unexamined, which is why we need yogic and contemplative training to make the unconscious conscious. We're constantly projecting our own meaning-making system onto the impartiality of the great expanse and contracting it due to ignorance and the need to survive. Oh, this is really a wall. And I'm really sitting inside a bed in a hotel room with a girl named Eliane in a country called the Great Britain. and that you are you and I am me, and I'm looking at an object called clock and I believe it actually tells time. All these things aren't absolutely true. The verification of these names and forms trickles down from the conceptual mind to the level of perception, feelings, and even the gut, which affects your beliefs, the way you dress and talk, and even the way you move. Bubbles within bubbles of sense-making system co-create your particular view, which solidifies your identity into a solid, inherently existent self, which then solidifies the world and others. And the others reinforce that view back onto you. Countless webs of entangled causes and conditioning looping onto each other and looping onto themselves, and this is how we get trapped in the matrix within matrix within matrix. Now, views aren't intrinsically good or bad, right or wrong. They serve as glues to hold our conventional reality together as a collective dream, which means that the most efficient way to control a population is to control their views. See, all political stances, ideologies, and every scientific and philosophical theories are partial views. Oneness, materialism, solipsism, idealism, panpsychism are all partial views and all fallacies. Duality is a fallacy, even non-duality is a fallacy too. Now, once you start to see through and transcend these partial views, you're not just limited to the confines of this conventional, base reality anymore. All of a sudden, I'm not just sitting inside a room. I'm swimming in suchness, unborn in silence, infinite, luminous, and without characteristics. Now, to deconstruct and go beyond all views, one has to understand the process of aggregation, or else it's just going to be going in circles. Now, what does aggregation mean? Well, to aggregate is to collect or gather parts into a whole. For example, you might collect or aggregate data from different sources in order to create a book. So each book will constitute a particular stance or a view. There are 5 aggregates, 5 fundamental elements or categories that makes up a sentient being. But keep in mind that the 5 aggregates is a model that describes processes, rather than clearly separate fixed categories that emphasize different aspects of being or different functions of the mind, so to speak. All of which operate as momentarily impermanent and changing processes, like constant moving and interacting currents in the ocean, and none of them is truly existing. You'll see that because all aggregates are codependent arising, they're ultimately empty, right? Which is what gives rise to the flexibility of appearances. If you don't understand how aggregates are compounded and compressed to form this or that partial view, you're always going to operate from that particular stance. So whatever remedy that you use to cure like depression or even dark night of the soul is still coming from that same matrix, right? It's still being compounded, right? You might feel better for a while, but you're still just perpetuating the same karmic cycle, chasing your own tail, so to speak, right? Even if you're into the more positive, quote unquote, aspects of spirituality, like manifestation, it's also useful to understand aggregation so you can be completely flexible in how you deconstruct and reconstruct the matrix in accordance to your own aspiration until there's zero distinction between what you desire and what the universe desires, because there'll be zero distance between mind and realities. It's instant manifestation, so to speak.
Sexual bliss is spiritual attainment, but you can have both. Causal body liberation, that's the subtle body, the energetic imprint. How does it feel?
I encourage you to try to understand the definition of the 5 aggregates solely based on the context of this model. First, you have the form aggregate. Whatever makes up the quote-unquote physical and material reality, bodies, trees, buildings, the earth. The feeling aggregate. Now, feeling from the aggregates model means sensations, or the general tone of what it feels like to be sentient right now, which can be broken down to pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Now, Vipassana body scanning specifically targets the feeling aggregates, so does TWIM, but coming from a very different perspective. The perception aggregates is the process of recognizing and interpreting sensory information through the 6 sense spheres of sight, sounds, smell, taste, touch, and thoughts, which then creates ideation and conceptuality. The noting practice specifically targets this aggregate. MCBT 4th path is more or less the permanent dissolution of the perceptual aggregates, but that's just one aggregate that's been emptied out. Next, you have the formation aggregate, or fabrication, is that which put things together, or the process of compounding phenomenons. Every second there's layers and layers and layers of formations at work. The way the mind stitches together thoughts and ideas to create meaning-making systems, identities, and narratives, that's one layer. The way the mind compresses the timeless and the infinite into space-time causality is another layer. When you're dreaming or take psychedelics, the mind is compounded very differently when you're awake or sober. The way that all the aggregates are compressed to create contraction is also formation at work. When you fall into a dreamless sleep or hit a cessation, the mind becomes completely uncompounded and unfabricated. And the process of fabrication stops, and then there's no more experience. When you emerge from a cessation and watch how reality reconstructs again, over and over again, you get the insight that, oh, everything's a fabrication, including all the other aggregates and so on. The 5th aggregate, cognition. that which is aware of the other aggregates. Be careful not to rarefy the sense of being conscious of something into a separate and substantial substrate, like an eternal awareness that contains the other aggregates. Cognition is a codependent phenomenon that emerges through the interaction of the other aggregates. Therefore, it does not have an intrinsic existence. So if all aggregates are by default partial, then the way we are conscious of something must also form a partial view of reality. Just investigate how your mind cognizes things moment to moment, to discriminate things as this or that, chop things into pieces. Where are we going?
We're going for dinner.
Where?
Skull Sketch.
How did you find it?
One of our friends told us yesterday. It was quite beautiful.
These 5 aggregates unite temporarily to form an individual sentient being with all its meaning-making systems and experiences. Since all compounded phenomena are impermanent and without an enduring self or essence, there is no separate agent at the center of the aggregates that are pulling the strings. The subject-object split is simply the way that the aggregates are compressed and entangled into this or that pattern due to karmic tendencies and causes and conditionings that are reinforced over and over, stretching from the thoughts and behaviors in the present moment all the way to your birth and even before that. All the way beyond to the quote-unquote Big Bang. To the Big Crunch, back to your death, and all the countless webs of causes and conditionings. Looping back to the present moment. So understanding the process of dependent origination from the non-spatial and non-temporal dimension allows you to see how you affect the present,
I'm 60, I'm not going to no.
past, and future simultaneously, because the cause is the effect and vice versa. Now, if you don't clean or resist, by eating away your karma now, you're eating away all the karmas of all of your lifetimes and of all sentient beings. Since all the aggregates are interpenetrating, they affect each other interdependently in feedback loops within feedback loops. For instance, form makes contacts with the 6 sense spheres. Perception then forms the idealization of a woman with a particular name and form, which then triggers the feeling of I like her, I don't like her, or neutral, which then proliferates mental formation, which leads to craving, clinging, and ways of becoming. And all that are cognized by consciousness, which creates a partial view of reality that further reinforces the causes and conditionings of the aggregation that gives rise to it, which both affects and is being affected by your ways of becoming, such as craving, clinging, habitual tendencies, and so on, which then further reinforces similar patterns of aggregation and view, which then again leads to certain ways of behavior, embodiment, and ways of becoming. This feedback loops gets compressed and knotted again and again to form the general geometry of your being and presence. This is how cycles of karmas are formed. So every time you feel a contraction in your body, there are views you haven't seen through, aggregates that are still entangled. Now, there are many ways to meditate with the aggregates, and you can be very creative with it. You can isolate and meditate on just one aggregate or 2 or 3 or 4 simultaneously and see how they affect one another, or you can gather all the aggregates into a singularity to create a unified whole. Now, this is where you start to go beyond the aggregates altogether to tap it into the ultimate view, the great expanse. Through various contemplations and analysis, different ways of pulling apart and reassembling the aggregates, a clear picture of exactly how your karmas are created, what makes you you, and how your mind constructs reality begins to form. You come to the realization that all aggregates are interchangeable, dependent arising, thus ultimately empty, which means you can be completely flexible in your ways of aggregation. Through infinite play, you can now embody all partial views simultaneously, depending on function, while being completely impartial.
Now being in the game, it's like, how can we fuck some shit up, create some stories and create characters, but you cannot believe anymore that you're the character.
Now, this is when you start to mold reality, bending space and time. Some yogic masters are so fluid that they can reconfigure their aggregation to map onto or embody other people so they can feel exactly what they feel or even think their thoughts. This is where we can become truly compassionate through dispassion, because now your interactions with other people is not being obscured by your own partial views. And this is where we start to tap into the territory of magic, powers, and siddhis. Precognition, past life recollection, astral traveling, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences, traversing through the bardos, communicating with interdimensional beings, and atemporal transmission will become as normal as driving a car or talking to someone over Zoom. When you break out of your current sense-making system and see that there is no such thing as base reality, because all realities and dimensions are stacked within each other in a singularity of what you are. Questions like what is possible, what is real, and what is normal becomes completely obsolete when you truly recognize the nature of mind, that which persists regardless of states, experiences, and dimensions. Just this, as they say. So even your darkest hours and all the wrong views are still the luminous nature of mind, and realization cannot be found anywhere else other than the appearance of things, because samsara is none other than nirvana. All conditions are the natural outflow of the unconditioned. So how does one transcend a view other than understanding the aggregates, various yogic maneuvers, and contemplative CrossFit skills? To put it simply, one transcends a view through recognition. Once you recognize the view to be a view, in a sense it stops being a view. At least now you can hold that higher view and abide in that recognition while chipping away the stains and obscurations until you throw them both away. Ultimately, one needs a penetrating insight into what's beyond your current stance, into the unknown. One needs a shift in perspective and see clearly that there was never a view to begin with. And again, when I say insight, it's not something intellectual. It's a direct and experiential recognition of truth into the way things truly are. The first three fetters of Buddhism is the identification to the self view, but anything that the self does to annihilate itself is still coming from the self, including letting go. And if you hold on to the view of non-existence or nihilism, you're going to spend eternity trying to eradicate the self or verify no self into another view. So you need a penetrating insight into Anatta and see clearly over and over again what's always and already the case. What you thought to be a snake has always been a rope, and then you dissolve the rope by seeing the emptiness of self and others. Even after Anatta, you continue to refine the ultimate view because obscuration prevails. Actually, the rest of the conditioning, being sneaky cunts, can restructure itself to solidify the old realization view. Actually, after Anatta is when you can really feel the contractions, because before that, it was blinded by the observer, whatever, the center. And now you have nowhere to hide. After Anatta, you get to deal with it much more efficiently. You know how to deal with it at the same time. This is another one of the paradoxes. You feel it less, but at the same time, you feel it more. It's more intense, at the same time, it's less. Because there's no more feelers. So everything leaves less traces. And before, the proliferation will continue much, much longer. Now it decreases exponentially. And another reason why Dark Night can seem like it's darker after Anatta or any kind of shift is because the bliss, or at least the equanimity of the realization, it's so profound that every little contraction it just becomes more pronounced, even it's very subtle. And also some of those contractions before realization, you don't even know they exist. I never knew what surrendering even meant until after Anatta. It's if you let go, you're gonna die. If you don't let go, you're gonna die. And then you just have no choice. You can't even surrender. It's you let go of letting go. You surrender to surrendering. I have conversations with people that just think I went through this path and it's all I'm just bubbling around, all happy. This just seems so easy for you. I'm not saying this is gonna happen to everyone, but the whole thing I went through, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But the price you pay for it, the freedom you get from it, you won't trade it for anything. But the process that you have to go through, it's life and death. I had my ex-girlfriend with me the whole time.
I realized I kind of killed you.
I think without her, I wouldn't make it. When I call her, it's fuck man, I'm going through a dark night again. And she would run out of her class when she was in her class and have to take care of me on the phone. And I remember just dying because I was having all the cessation, having dark night. And the only sound that I could hang on to was the sound of her typing when she was doing her homework. So one of the remedies that, for me personally, going through a dark night was kind of the 12-step program where you got to make amends to clean up your previous karma, so to speak. I started to realize my relationship with people, or especially with my parents. I realized I've never said I love you to my dad ever, and I've never given him a hug. And then I was I think this is the only thing I need to do right now to get through this. I hugged him. I was on my knees saying I forgive you for cheating on my mom, having another family, making things right with my ex. That also dissolved a lot of my conditions around relationships. If I could completely let go of Elena, I could let go of anything.
That's how I feel about Taylor. I mean, if I could let go of that, I can let go of anything. That was my last quote-unquote human relationship.
Here are some remedies for the dark night of the soul. I made an entire video for most of the techniques mentioned here. You can check them out in the playlist in the description. If you want to learn how to meditate with the aggregates, there's also a link in the description. But remember that whatever remedies that you use must be thrown away once cured. From the perspective of a clean shirt, both the stain and the detergent are obscurations. Remedy number 1, continue to recognize how the mind is clinging on to very subtle partial views. Realization itself can become its own obscuration. In fact, views that come with awakening is the hardest to deconstruct because it's so all-encompassing and your experiences of non-duality is so vast and so real that you just stop questioning everything. Or use non-duality to suppress, bypass, and justify. You think you're waking up, but you're just woken up to another matrix. You see this play out in the spiritual marketplace on the internet. Each community, led by a solo realizer, it creates an echo chamber with their audience. This camp says, oh, shadow work is the only way. Another community says, oh, that's all empty. Another camp said awareness is the only true self. And another community say awareness is going to make you suppress your emotion, so they rarefy the humans in the physical world. Another community says inquiry is the only way. Meditation practices can hold you back. My realization is more true than your realization. Oh, psychedelic is the only way to liberation. No wonder why the average seeker is so confused, right? There's so many dark night yogis out there. Too many scattered informations. And the communities aren't necessarily talking to each other because they all have their own non-dual views. A lot of discrepancies and discontent in the mind, or even projections and discrimination from other people, come from holding on to unexamined views about what awakening is and what it should look like, which can lead to depersonalization and energy imbalance, because some of these views can suppress our natural proclivities as human beings. A lot of Tantra practitioners don't even practice to eliminate suffering. That's not their main goal, so to speak. That's a byproduct of practicing to experience beauty, to explore the mind and for connections. And from the point of view of Dzogchen, when emptiness ends, Vajrayana begins. It's about putting the form back into emptiness and so on. Most of the resources coming from the pragmatic Dharma circle is derived from the Theravada vehicle, with the goal of making the Arhat copies of itself in the modern world. I wouldn't have realized Anatta without these resources, and I'm extremely grateful for the pragmatic Dharmas. But modern life and the lifestyle of a solo realizers sometimes just don't mix. If you're not about the lifestyle anyway, it can make your path extremely destabilizing. It can also make you kind of schizophrenic. Why even modernize the definition of arhatship in the first place? What if you still want to have sex, still have a relationship, start a family, or become a CEO, and the only view available to you is the renunciative one? For the Bodhisattva, purification is important, but the goal isn't to completely get rid of conditionings and desire, but to integrate, express, and transmute afflictions into wisdom, transform them into workable energy to create art and life, and to develop capacities and abilities for the sake of all sentient beings. Some Buddhas can take one look at you and just see the entire geometry of your karmas in all lifetimes. They can even twist and untangle your karmas for you, like doing assisted raps. You don't need to get rid of your personality either. See, each Buddha is his own complete but unique geometry, a fractal that contains a whole and vice versa. Most seekers in modernity only know about the Theravada view, and after attaining Anatta, a lot of people have trouble getting used to the world. So they often become lost or confused or even quote-unquote depressed because the lifestyle of an Arhat depends on a monistic community. So they can either switch vehicle or check into the monastery or go to therapy or quote-unquote integrate for the rest of their lives while trying to adapt to the city life and so on. But what if there's another path? So the 4-path Arhat model is actually just a Theravada invention, a vehicle that was useful from a very specific history and time on a very specific context. So reinventing an attempt to squeeze your entire existence into the Arhat mode in a completely different context can be problematic, thus creating its own shadows. And this isn't a shit on Theravada and think that somehow it's the lower vehicle, because it is the foundation for the other vehicles. Sila and morality and practices like Vipassana and Samatha are very important prerequisites for tantric practices. All paths are inventions, fabrications that serve as tools for mind training. The problem is that most people throw away these tools too early, holding on to the view that they're done. Oh, I don't need to practice anymore. A very common non-dual view. And with that said, here are some examples of extreme views that are ingrained in the modern Dharma and non-duality circle. You're not the body and you're not the mind. That's an extreme view that results in people not taking care of or even hating on their own bodies. This view might be useful to break out your total mind-body identification initially, but you can definitely become identified with disidentification. Even out-of-body experiences depends on the nervous system and perceptual apparatus. The only way for infinity to know itself is through the finite. We are infinite finite beings. Being perfect after realization is also another view, right? You can be very realized and still have relative human problems. That doesn't mean you should bypass them though. There's also a tendency for people to zombify themselves after Anatta because so-and-so said that you're not supposed to feel emotions. So they bypass and suppress their feelings. Or they feel jaded, or when emotions do arise, they feel conflicted. There's also a tendency to be lazy and unproductive after Anatta because you're holding on to the view that there's nobody here doing anything. In fact, your productivity level and mental and physical condition increase exponentially after awakening because your body and mind frees up a tremendous amount of energy previously wasted on maintaining illusions. There's also a tendency to vilify the conceptual mind in that, you don't need to read or contemplate anymore just because you see through the emptiness of thoughts. Certain philosophical studies are extremely important in refining views and grounding insights and realizations. If you still hold on to the view that concepts are bad, there's still a duality between concepts and reality. You don't realize that you're still thinking about having no thoughts or still conceptualizing about having no concepts. If you truly see through the emptiness of thought, it doesn't make a difference between thoughts or no thoughts. In our contemplative CrossFit book club, we're learning how to read tantrically, to not merely read with our conceptual minds, but with our entire nervous system, body, and being, in order to connect our mind streams directly to the masters to receive direct transmission. Reading with your third eye makes the text panoramic and visceral. Holding on to the view that everything is spontaneous and that I should always go with the flow, you could easily bypass. You can be going in circles because the quote-unquote flow state you're experiencing is confined within your own limited stance. So you think you're making progress, but you actually just, you're enforcing the same karmas over and over. Papa Sambhava said his view is vaster than the sky, but his attention to karmas and causes and conditionings are as fine as a grain of sand. You may have recognized the fundamental nature or the substance of mind and reality, that's the what, but how are phenomena compounded? What are the specific cause and conditionings at work that's generating your own specific karmas and conditionings? Quote-unquote, everything is spontaneous is an extreme view. Everything is predetermined, also another extreme view. The more liberating view is somewhere in the middle. However, if one is liberated from both sides of the extremity, one also transcends the view in the middle. Nagarjuna said, quote, "The view without middle and extremes is the perfect view. This is the unsurpassable view, and whoever attains this view will attain omniscience." And with that, you go beyond even the view of the middle way, dependent arising, and emptiness. When in doubt, contemplate and go beyond the four extremes. 1. Being, attachment to existence. This is the view of eternalism. All awareness is eternal, blah blah blah. 2. Non-being, attachment to non-existence. This is the view of nihilism. 3. Both existence and non-existence. 4. Neither existence nor non-existence. Now, if you can truly comprehend what I'm saying here, dark night of the soul will resolve itself spontaneously as a byproduct. You don't want to be focused on just specific techniques. You want to see the bigger picture, the context. Even with that said, let me give you some very specific techniques. Number 1, Vipassana meditation. Vipassana means to penetrate and see clearly the true nature of all experiences. Insight practice. When you dissolve reality down to the subatomic particle, you also get the insight that the mind is constructing everything and that both samsara and nirvana are your own creations.
What's in front of me, that's the whole of the universe in that moment. But there's the intentional moment because it's just like the frames are never ending.
It's like so fast, but it's completely still.
It's never the same frame, even if it's the same view. Because it's always moving, even if it's still.
When something moves at the speed of light, it becomes eternity. Because stillness gives rise to movement and vice versa. Some of the most profound insights come from moments of despair, because you have no choice but to inquire into what the fuck is this? What am I? Who is it that's experiencing misery and disgust? Is there even anyone here that's been dissolved? Is there anything there when anger or whatever is experienced without a subject? Self-inquiry is another technique. Remedy number 3, twin, which cultivates both feelings of loving kindness or metta and jhana simultaneously. Now, twin people say they hardly experience this dark night of the soul because of their emphasis on loving kindness, which means the intensity of dark nights depends on many factors, including practice, genetic and karma, life circumstances, etc. For some people, dark night can just be a bad afternoon. My dark nights are very intense because I'm just a very extreme person. Love every part of yourself unconditionally. Forgive yourself in order to forgive all sentient beings. Detach the thoughts from the negative feelings so they don't intensify by reinforcing each other in a feedback loop. And feel the feels completely all the way through without grasping or aversion. Thank every contraction, because every affliction is the gateway to truth. Actually, it is the truth of the moment. The ability to be absorbed into jhanas is also a great remedy, because jhanas not only serve as all natty morphins or MDMA, but they are their energetic woomph that's necessary for dissolving conditionings. Technique number 4, open awareness meditation, like the Ruber Spiral Kelly Lockstop, right? Even though I've said before that awareness is also empty and not the true self, it's useful to transfer your identity from the small self to the big self so you can use the vast, boundless, timeless space of awareness as a temporary ground to rest on to let the storm pass or to dissolve conditionings before letting go of even that and see the deeper non-dual insight that there's never a distinction between background and foreground awareness and sensations. Technique number 5, learning how to let go through practices like do nothing meditation, Michael Taft's dropping the ball. Whatever resistance or contraction arises, release it the way you release the clenching of a fist. Let everything be exactly the way it is without trying to interfere with reality, because the mind does not know how to liberate itself. By going beyond its own limit, it experiences unwinding. From deep confusion, it drops knowing. From intense suffering comes releasing. From complete exhaustion comes total rest. All these go in cycles, perpetually repeating until one realizes everything is indeed already liberated, a spontaneous happening before beginningless time. So what have you dissolved on this trip?
Without not even one single thought, and trust that even business takes care of itself.
Just more love, more space.
Remedy number 6, establishing a sangha. Find a community of other practitioners to build a samaya so you can have the support system in case you fall off to the deep end. Members of the group can dissolve karmas for and as each other. Each member contributes to each other's realization by co-creating the mandala of a Buddha field that becomes more and more powerful and aesthetic. A silent signal that can be accessed at any time. Also, it's hard to see your own partial views, so getting feedback from coaches and teammates who you trust can cut through a lot of your own bullshit. Remedy number 7, read, especially non-dual philosophical texts. Remedy number 8, keep up a consistent practice and build up a capacity in case shit hits the fan. Remedy number 9, self-care for non-self. Exercise regularly, eat healthy, and get your shit together, brah. The geometry of your environment must be cultivated in ways that are conducive to the incubation of realization because the environment is the extension of mind and vice versa. Remedy number 10, make sila and morality gains and collect good merits. That's like having a good diet for the mind. Remedy number 11, keep your experiences but continue to deepen your insights and refine your view.